When I ask people, hey, what do you know about cortisol? When I teach workshops or when I talk to my patients, they'll be like, oh, that's a stress hormone. It's bad. It is technically a stress hormone, but there's a slight differentiation I like to make here. It's not really the stress hormone. It's the hormone your body makes in response to stress.
You're tuned in to the Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Kinney Show. This week, we are going to be talking all about cortisol, which if you follow me or listen to me, you know I like to talk about this hormone. And I want to talk today about how I think it's misunderstood. I have been on social media, some recently, seeing a lot of posts where people are saying, signs of high cortisol. High cortisol is the problem. You need to lower your cortisol, lower your cortisol, lower your cortisol. And while there is some truth to this, that it is important to not have too much cortisol, the real truth is that most people in today's world that have a lot of chronic health issues or a lot of symptoms actually have not enough cortisol. So I spend a lot of time looking at cortisol levels, assessing them, look at them in the morning, look at them throughout the day. And again, the majority of the patients that I see, their cortisol levels are too low, or their cortisol circadian rhythm, which is what cortisol is responsible for creating, is out of alignment. It's not a proper rhythm. And this can come from cortisol dysregulation. So the main message of this episode is for you to understand that cortisol, much like glucose, is very, very important. Meaning, if you don't have enough glucose, same thing if you don't have enough cortisol, your cells won't function. You can't get out of bed if you don't have cortisol. Your cells can't do their job because cortisol, when you think of it, when I ask people, hey, what do you know about cortisol? When I teach workshops or when I talk to my patients, they'll be like, oh, that's a stress hormone. It's bad. And it is technically a stress hormone, but there's a slight differentiation I like to make here. It's not really the stress hormone. It's the hormone your body makes in response to stress. But the purpose of the hormone is to actually give you energy to deal with stress. It's the thing that gives you the energy to go into fight-flight mode, right? So, and the reason we have that mode, the reason our nervous system goes into that mode is so we can run or fight from something that is, going to be harmful to us. So cortisol, again, it's very important for your body to make in order to give you energy. So I like to think of it as the energy hormone. So that's one of its functions. It's going to give you energy. And so similar, and then there's a lot of similarities between cortisol and glucose. So similar to glucose gives your cells energy. So we want to have enough of it. We don't want too low. We also don't want too high with glucose because that can cause problems with receptor issues, which I'm going to get into. But the same thing goes for cortisol. With too much, we can start to have a problem. And again, I'm going to dive into that a little bit later. But with not enough, you can't even do anything, right? So you have to have that cortisol in order to give you energy. So number one, I like to think of it as an energy hormone, which is really important as we kind of start to understand this molecule too. Number two, cortisol's other main function in the body is it acts as your body's natural steroid. So if you've ever taken a prednisone or a steroid to reduce inflammation, guess what? Prednisone or any of the steroid forms is a synthetic form of cortisol. So cortisol or cortisone, which is something your body will convert to, is your body's natural steroid. So it will actually reduce inflammation. So when you don't have enough cortisol, inflammation can get unchecked. You can have inflammation going crazy. So a lot of my patients with low cortisol, they will tend to feel puffy and inflamed. They'll complain to me about acne. They'll complain about random pains moving around. They might have joint pain. They might have muscle pain. They might have GI pain or stomach pain. And these things tend to get better when we get their cortisol levels up to an adequate place. So as you can see, it's a really important hormone. So when I'm explaining it to patients and when I think about it myself, when I'm thinking about a case, I think of it as like the fix-it hormone. Because it's going to go and fix things. And I also think of it as your body's currency that it uses to do things. So, and this is an analogy I'm going to touch on a lot throughout this episode. We're going to think about cortisol as being the money that your body uses to spend on things. And this is the concept we're going to go with. When you are resting or you are sleeping or you are in rest and digest or a parasympathetic state, that is when your body is going to be able to build cortisol, or you're going to earn it and you're going to put it in the bank. So we want to be able to have enough money in the bank so that when we wake up or we go into fight, flight mode, or we need that energy, we can pull from it. Just like if you're living life, you need to make sure there's money in your bank account so you can spend it on things, right? So I like to think, again, we want to make sure that we're saving as much as we're spending, or we have enough coming in that will allow us to spend what we need. And the problem starts to arise. And here's why I'll explain why high cortisol can be a problem. Because typically if we're in the fight flight state, which, some kind of stress triggers our fight flight state, we go into that state, our body's going to pump out cortisol to give us energy so we can stay in the fight flight state. As long as we're not in that state for very long, let's say that there's a traffic situation and your cortisol goes up because you energy to be able to maneuver through the traffic, and then as long as we come out of that fight flight state and the cortisol levels will come back down, it's not a problem. We didn't spend very much. We had a quick spend and then we stopped the spend. But if you stay in an acute stress state for a prolonged period of time, it's kind of like spending a lot of money without money coming in. So if anyone has ever had a time in their life where they've had, multiple expenses and maybe they lost a job or income wasn't matching what their spend was, what happens? Well, your body, similar to a bank, will give you a line of credit. It will allow you to kind of spend more than you make for a little while, and this is where we will drink caffeine or we take stimulants or we do those things. And those things they're kind of like spending money on a credit card. It's like, well, I don't actually have that reserve in that bank account, but I'll allow you to use some of this energy. And sometimes what the body will do is if we have a stress state that's, we get put into a stress state, but we don't have enough currency, cortisol there to produce to give you the energy to deal with the stress, the body will be like, well, I don't have cortisol. I'm going to pump out some adrenaline. And so when I'm explaining this, I usually say that cortisol is a very expensive molecule to make. It takes a lot of rest and a lot of downtime and a lot of rest and digest time to make sure we have adequate amount of cortisol. And it takes a lot of cofactors. It's a complex molecule. Adrenaline, conversely, is a very, very cheap molecule. It's very easy for the body to make. The body can kind of always make adrenaline. So for a little while, the body will, it will spend its adrenaline if the cortisol reserves are a little bit low. And this will give you energy, but it's a different kind of energy. So I forgot to maybe touch on this. Cortisol, when it's in an appropriate level, just like glucose, when it's, when you've eaten a meal and you've eaten a healthy meal and your glucose is, up a little bit and you feel pretty good and you've got energy, you feel good. Same thing with cortisol. When you've just slept 8 hours, and with this analogy, let's say sleeping for 8 hours earns you $100 worth of cortisol. Well, you wake up that morning and you're like, wow, I feel great. I've got all this energy in my energy bank account. I can go take on the day. You feel good when you have cortisol. And if you have a little bit of adrenaline there, that can feel good too. You're going to feel motivated. You're going to feel happy. You're going to feel excited. And you're going to have good energy. Now, let's say you only sleep a couple of hours and so maybe you only earned $20 worth of cortisol, but you have a full day. Well, what do we tend to do? We tend to drink caffeine, or, there are some people take Adderall or take other stimulants, but we take something that's going to give us this energy. It's not going to feel quite the same as if you had that well-rested night, right? And I'm talking maybe weeks of well-rested. It's sometimes when we're already deficient and we have one good night, we still don't feel very good. But think back to a time when you've been generally well-rested, you had a good night's sleep, you woke up and you felt great. That is the feeling of, your body has built up enough cortisol. Your cortisol will peak in the morning because that's when it's supposed to peak, and you're going to have good energy to take on the day. Now, again, if we have a night where we don't sleep very much, or maybe we're coming off of many nights where we haven't slept very much, we don't have a lot of money or cortisol or whatever you want to call it in that energy bank account, we're going to drink caffeine. We're going to take a stimulant, which is going to tell our body to produce an energy hormone. But if we don't have enough cortisol, it's going to produce adrenaline. So we're going to be on that adrenaline energy, which is energy, but it doesn't feel quite the same. And you can feel a little jittery and it might make you a little anxious. And I think this is what will cause that kind of tired but wired state where your body's tired. You don't really have that energy, but you're on like caffeine. You're running on fumes, essentially. You're running on adrenaline fumes. So you can still get the things done, but you don't feel that great. Now, again, if you were to exist in a state where you're not sleeping a lot, and you have that low energy reserve and you're constantly drinking caffeine is actually going to even lower that energy reserve even more. Again, it's like spending money on a credit card. And if you don't have money to pay that credit card back, we're going to go more and more into debt. And so oftentimes what I see when my patients come in and they have a lot of symptoms, fatigue. Maybe they have some insomnia because they're not sleeping because they're hopped up on adrenaline. So it's hard for the body to sleep later that night. They might have joint pain. They might feel puffy as a really common symptom that I hear. They feel swollen, so their face feels puffy. They feel bloated. Their digestion isn't working properly. They might have acne. A lot of symptoms where your body just doesn't feel good. You feel inflamed. You don't feel good. When we test their cortisol levels, their cortisol is 99% of the time, it is very, very low. And so the work here is we want to get the cortisol levels back up to a good place. Now, a healthy cortisol level is going to look different throughout different points in the day. It is going to be at its highest in the morning after you've had a good night's sleep. That's what it should be. It should, the body kind of builds or puts that reserve in, kind of as putting money into your energy cortisol bank account. And then when you wake up in the morning, your cortisol is going to be at its highest. So that's what wakes you up. It gives you energy to start your day. Cortisol is going to slowly start to decline throughout the rest of the day, and it will be at its lowest in the evening so that you're able to fall asleep. Because when cortisol is high, you have energy, right? You feel good. You're ready to go. You're not really ready to sleep. But so we do want it to go down in the evening so we can rest, so we can build back up more for the next day. So the main takeaway here is, again, that we want to have enough cortisol in our cortisol bank account, and that it is a very important hormone. Without it, problems start to arise. But let's say, and oftentimes these problems are arising after prolonged periods of chronic stress. So I'll use myself as an example. There have been multiple times in my life where I've had prolonged periods of high cortisol, but a few years ago, I was going through a divorce at the height of the pandemic. So my cortisol levels were pretty high. And here's what your body does. If you need to be in fight flight state, your body will do that for you. Like if you have a period of time in life where, and the pandemic was kind of like that for all of us. March of 2020 was a time when we were all on alert. Our bodies were like, we don't know what's happening. We better pump out a lot of cortisol to keep our energy up, to keep us in fight flight so we can fight a disease if it comes our way, or, deal with whatever we have to deal with because it was an unknown time. So all of our cortisol levels were, for most of us, pretty high. And then you're constantly pumping out high levels of cortisol. You're not going to sleep very well. You're not going to relax. You're going to be stuck in that higher fight flight state. And like I said, you only earn or build more cortisol for your cortisol bank account when you are resting. So if you're not resting, if you're constantly putting out fires and dealing with all the things, eventually you're going to go into debt, right? So this is what happens is when we stay stuck in these fight flight phases for a long period of time. And this is what I think there's like a nuance that we need to make sure is understood. Yes, high cortisol is bad, but it's really bad because it's actually going to end up lowering your cortisol. And we're going to see more symptoms when cortisol is low. I don't typically see patients coming in that have elevated cortisol. Every now and then it happens, and that's usually when they've come in because, they're actually in the middle of the stress state. But typically when your cortisol levels are high, even if they're a little too high, you have a lot of energy and you feel good. You're not usually going to the doctor at that point. Again, sometimes that's not the case. So if you're someone that I see high levels of cortisol, oftentimes in my patients with acute infections, when they've got acute Lyme, or you're fighting something, or you're exposed to mold, or there's something that, that also is not making you feel physically well. But if you're going through like a life stressful event, when you're moving, yes, moving's not fun, but typically your body's like, all right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to get there. You're not usually going to see your doctor because everything's falling apart. Usually that happens after the stressful period. So this is where patients always get confused. They're like, wait a second, I don't understand. How do I feel so good? I have a couple of patients I'm working with right now that just left really, really high stress jobs. They will basically work to death for the past few years, and they've now left their job, and now they don't feel good. And they're like, this doesn't make any sense. I've left my job. All my stress is gone. Why do I feel so crappy? I felt better physically when I was in the job. Maybe they didn't feel very good emotionally. And that's because we were stressed for so long that now we're at a point where the adrenals have crashed. The cortisol levels have crashed. And so now the work is to build them back up. So if you're listening to this and you're in a high stress period of life, the best advice I can give you is you want to make sure that you are spending enough time in rest and digest. So prioritizing sleep is really, really important, but also just doing other activities that make your body relax. So this could be reading, this could be a bath, this could be meditation, this could be going for a walk in nature without screens or phones or talking to anybody. So it's things that you do that calm the body down. Those are also going to allow you to build more cortisol. So again, we always want to be thinking saving versus spending. And your body is amazing. It can exist in a high stress state for a very long period of time, but you have to make sure you're allowing it to build more of that energy to put in your energy stores. So again, main takeaway message here is cortisol is a very important molecule. You have to have it. It is an energy molecule. It helps with inflammation. It does all of the things that your body, like it helps all aspects of your physical body. It also helps with your mood. I mean, it's really important for combating depression. It's important for motivation. It's important for focus. Low cortisol, people with low cortisol, they can't focus. They become really, really ADD. It's hard to get motivated. It's hard to get things done. In short, you really don't feel good when you don't have enough cortisol. So second takeaway message is you have to make sure you have enough savings, you have enough energy, you have enough cortisol in that savings account so you can spend it. So if you look at your day or your week, like, hey, I've got a really long day today. I'm going to make sure I take a lunch. I'm going to make sure I take a break and I'm going to lay down, or I'm going to read my book, or I'm going to go sit outside and get some downtime, or I'm going to make sure I go to sleep early the night before. And you know, I think it's always great. Patients come in, they're like, I'm going to try to go to acupuncture and massage and do all these things. And those are fantastic, but sometimes they're not realistic, you know, to do all of the like what we think of as the de-stress things. I've found that the way to make real change in this energy bank account is to do the little things like, hey, I'm going to go lay down for 10 minutes. I've got a break in between clients or in between patients, or I have a break in between meetings. I'm going to go take a quick rest, or I'm going to go to bed 20 minutes earlier. I'm not going to try for 2 hours earlier because I won't get what I need to get done, but I'm going to try to get 20 extra minutes of rest. I'm going to try to meditate for 5 minutes before bed. It's the little habits. And this is kind of the same thing when if you're putting yourself on a budget. If you're like, wow, my spend is higher than my income, what am I going to do? I'm going to maybe not get, me personally, I'm going to not buy 2 kombuchas a day. I'm going to buy 1 kombucha every other day. Or you make these small tweaks, but they add up over time. And the small tweaks are a little bit easier to implement than like, okay, I'm going to, take a nap every hour, every day, and I'm going to go get massage 3 times a week, and I'm going to go to acupuncture. And again, those things are fantastic. And if you can do all those, power to you. Awesome. My kind of energy savings practice when I've got, a busy time, and granted, I love taking a day off and taking naps. It's one of my favorite things, but reality is that doesn't happen all the time. So I love to take a 10-minute rest in the afternoon, and it's kind of like my cortisol rebuilding time. I lay down. Sometimes I'll read. Oftentimes I listen to music. I just close my eyes and I kind of imagine it as a little like reboot time. I'm also a fan of meditation if that's something that works for you and if that's something you will do regularly, because these practices have to kind of be done on a regular basis. After a yoga class, when you kind of relax in savasana, that can count as this reboot time. So then it's just trying to add in these little things that are going to give you a little bit more energy. And again, in my brain, I'm always like, okay, what's going to help me build some cortisol? And I know that sounds weird. And after this episode, it shouldn't sound weird. But sometimes when I first tell people, like, wait, why would I want more cortisol? But you actually do. You want enough cortisol. And that's kind of where, again, this distinction needs to be made, that you need to have enough cortisol or your body's not going to feel good and you're not going to function properly. So making sure that we're keeping enough energy or enough cortisol in that energy bank account and we're not spending more than we're bringing in is going to really help your overall kind of stress state and your physical body so much. So I hope this was helpful, maybe a little bit eye-opening. I have a lot of content about this. There's some other episodes I've done talking about the stress, like the stress state and the stress cycle. So you can go back and check some of those episodes out. If you follow me on Instagram at Dr. Kinney, I do a lot of short videos about cortisol and about, kind of the adrenal stuff. So, again, if you're interested, please follow along for more. And thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.